The year was 2347. Humanity had just made its mark in the galaxy, but the road ahead was still uncertain. The Human Federation was locked in an arms race with powerful alien empires, each seeking dominance over the stars. Amidst this chaos, the Federation's highest leaders decided to send a diplomatic mission to secure a crucial resource, a rare element known as viewership, found only on a distant, uncharted planet in a remote sector of space. This mission was special. It was not just about gaining resources. It was about peace. If successful, it could open doors to a new era of cooperation between humanity and the Exocarn Empire, a technologically advanced alien race known for their fierce intelligence and sharp, calculating minds. Kara Monroe, a skilled diplomat and the youngest ambassador ever appointed by the Human Federation, was chosen to lead the mission. Strong-willed, sharp, and known for her quick thinking, Kara was the perfect choice. She believed in peace, but she also knew the importance of standing firm when necessary. Her counterpart on the mission was Roxar, a high-ranking Xakarn diplomat. Tall, with silvery blue skin and sharp angular features, Roxar had the reputation of being cold and calculating. His people valued intellect above all else, and their emotions were often hidden behind layers of logic and reason. Roxar wasn't used to working with humans, and the Exocarn had little trust in the Federation's diplomats. Still, both Kara and Roxar shared a common goal: securing the viewership to prevent their factions from escalating into war. The journey was long, and the two ambassadors had little in common. The Exocarn were known for their slow, deliberate speech, while humans like Kara were quick to act and think. They rarely spoke on the way to the planet, the silence growing thicker with each passing hour. Kara's thoughts raced. She wondered what the Exocarn's true intentions were. She had heard rumors that their leaders had no interest in peace. Roxar, for his part, had his doubts about humanity's ability to handle such a delicate mission. But nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. The mission was going smoothly, until it wasn't. As the small fleet of Federation and Xakarn ships neared the planet, the unthinkable happened. A sudden, violent shockwave ripped through space. The ship's systems went haywire, alarms blared, and the stars outside the viewports twisted in a surreal blur. Kara felt the sharp pull of gravity as the ship's hull groaned, and then everything went black. When she woke up, everything was different. Kara opened her eyes to a blurry scene. She was in a small, cramped compartment of the ship, surrounded by smoke and debris. The crash had sent her tumbling across the cockpit. Her head throbbed, and there was blood on her face. Her first instinct was to check on the others. "Roxar," she called weakly, pushing herself upright. There was no answer at first, and her heart skipped a beat. Had he? But then, from the shadows of the wreckage, Roxar's voice broke through. "I'm here." Kara turned and saw him standing, unscathed, though his clothing was torn and bloodied. His calm demeanor was almost unnerving in the face of disaster. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice cold and measured, as always. He was already checking the controls, trying to assess the damage. Kara was about to speak when another voice crackled over the emergency comms. "This is Federation Command. Are you both alive? Respond." Kara looked at Roxar, her worry evident in her eyes. "We're alive, but our ship is gone. We're stranded. Do you copy?" The comms crackled again, but this time, there was no response. The Federation was either too far to help, or they had already lost contact with the ship. Kara clenched her fists in frustration. Her thoughts raced. They were on an uncharted planet, far from Federation space, with no backup and no communication. Roxar was already scanning the area, his alien eyes sharp and focused. "The crash has disabled most of our systems. There's a shelter nearby. We should head there. It's the only chance we have." Kara nodded reluctantly, though the thought of relying on the Exocarn didn't sit well with her. She had always admired their intellect, but she had never trusted them. Not after everything that had happened between their two peoples. They moved quickly, gathering what they could from the wreckage, knowing their survival depended on getting to that shelter. The alien planet was eerily silent, and the sun above them was an unfamiliar greenish hue. As they walked, Kara couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. Something wasn't right. They weren't just stranded on any planet. They were stranded in the middle of something much bigger than they could comprehend. Xraxar spoke again, his voice steady. I suspect this planet holds more secrets than we know, and they may not be friendly. Kara looked at him, unsure whether to believe him. But as the shelter came into view, she realized they had no choice but to trust each other. After all, there was no one else out here. And so, they entered the unknown. Kara and Xraxar stepped cautiously toward the shelter's entrance, the faint hum of the building's power systems, the only sound breaking the silence of the alien jungle. Kara's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over her. Xraxar's calm demeanor was both comforting and irritating. Comforting because it gave the impression that he was in control, but irritating because she knew the Exocarn cared more about logic than the chaos surrounding them. Something's out there, Kara whispered, her voice tense. Xraxar didn't answer. Instead, his sharp eyes scanned the dense forest outside, his alien senses picking up something she couldn't see. He had already drawn a long, sleek weapon from his side, an energy blade that hummed faintly. Kara's hand instinctively went to her blaster, though she wasn't sure how effective it would be against whatever lurked in the shadows. A rustling sound broke the tension, followed by a low growl. It came from the thick underbrush, and it was moving closer. Kara's grip tightened around her weapon. Her pulse quickened. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice low. Xraxar nodded. "I do." Before Kara could react, something leaped from the underbrush. It was large, far larger than any creature she had ever seen. Its body was covered in dark, leathery scales, and it had multiple eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It had the body of a four-legged predator, but its head was almost insect-like, with mandibles that clicked as it hissed at them. The creature was fast, too fast for Kara to get a clear shot. It lunged, aiming straight for Xraxar. Xraxar's reaction was immediate. He ducked under the beast's swipe, rolling to the side, and in one fluid motion, he brought his energy blade down on the creature's side. There was a sickening hiss as the blade made contact, and the creature screamed, recoiling. Kara fired her blaster, aiming for the creature's head, but it dodged the shot, moving with impossible speed. She cursed under her breath, trying to adjust her aim. Xraxar's blade flicked out again, this time slicing into the creature's leg. The beast howled in pain, but it wasn't retreating. It was angrier than ever. It charged again, this time toward Kara. She reacted without thinking. Rolling to the side, she fired another shot. This time, she connected, right in the creature's massive chest. It screeched in pain, its massive body tumbling backward, but it wasn't down yet. Kara quickly reloaded, her heart hammering in her chest. "We need to finish this," she shouted, barely able to hear her own voice over the creature's furious screeching. Xraxar moved faster than she could keep up with, his energy blade flashing in the dark. With a single swift motion, he stabbed the blade deep into the creature's throat, and it went limp almost instantly. Kara gasped for breath, her fingers still tight around the blaster. She hadn't expected the fight to be this intense. She hadn't expected any of this. The silence returned, thick and heavy, as the two of them stood over the massive beast. It twitched once, then lay still, the last of its life drained. Xraxar wiped the blade clean, never looking at the fallen creature. It was a Slexer, a territorial predator. Kara was still catching her breath. Territorial. That thing nearly killed us, and you barely broke a sweat. He glanced at her then, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. It is common on worlds like this. Creatures like this defend their territory aggressively. Kara shook her head, still processing the encounter. "Well, that's one problem down. But I don't feel any safer. Not with whatever else is out there." Zraxar's eyes narrowed as he turned back toward the shelter. There will be more. This planet is not welcoming. We need to fortify our position. Stay close. They moved quickly, returning to the shelter's interior. Kara's mind raced as she checked the small data pad she had recovered from the wreckage. The planet was a dangerous, untamed place, far more so than she'd imagined. And now, with the Slexer attack, she wasn't sure if they were even safe inside the shelter. She needed to gather more information, but the reality was that they had no choice but to stay put and defend themselves. Zraxar was already setting up basic defenses around the shelter, simple traps and makeshift barricades. It was a reminder of just how different they were. Kara was used to thinking on her feet, acting quickly, while Zraxar worked with methodical precision. "Shouldn't we try to fix the ship?" Kara asked, her frustration creeping in again. Zraxar didn't look up as he worked. "It's too damaged. We must focus on surviving the night." Kara clenched her jaw, but didn't argue. Zraxar was right in one regard. They were vulnerable, and repairing the ship would take time they didn't have. As the sun began to set, casting an eerie glow over the jungle, Kara felt a chill run down her spine. She had survived many difficult situations before, but this felt different. The planet wasn't just a place they had crashed. It was alive. It was watching them, and they had no idea what would happen next. Night fell quickly on the alien world, the green sky dimming to a dark, almost unnatural shade. Kara stood near the shelter's entrance, her eyes scanning the dense jungle that surrounded them. The sounds of the jungle had changed since the Slexer attack. It was quieter now, but the silence was just as unsettling. "We need to keep watch," Kara said, turning toward Zraxar, who was sitting against one of the shelter's walls, his gaze distant. His calm, collected nature was both reassuring and annoying to her, especially after the chaos of the creature attack. He didn't seem bothered at all, as if facing danger was nothing more than a passing inconvenience. Zraxar glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. "The shelter is secure for now. It's better to conserve energy." Kara opened her mouth to argue, but then closed it. Zraxar was right about one thing: they couldn't afford to waste energy. She turned away and sat down near the control panel, trying to stay alert. They were stranded in the middle of an alien jungle with no help in sight. If she and Zraxar were going to survive, they had to figure out what was really going on here. Hours passed, and the quiet of the shelter was broken only by the occasional distant howl from the jungle. Kara's mind was racing, trying to make sense of their situation. It wasn't just the Slexer that worried her. She had a feeling that the planet itself was hiding something dangerous. "What do you know about this planet?" Kara asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Zraxar didn't look at her, but his voice was steady. "It's not a planet that should be inhabited. Its records are incomplete. The Exakar never fully explored it." Kara frowned, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, incomplete? You're saying your people know about this place, but didn't bother to map it properly." Zraxar finally met her gaze, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "We knew about it, but the planet's energy readings were unstable. We avoided it. No one knows why it has such strange readings." Kara's mind raced. What kind of strange readings? Could they be related to the creatures or the shelter? Zraxar didn't answer right away, and Kara felt a chill run through her. He was hiding something, she could tell. But what? What was it that he wasn't saying? Before she could ask another question, a loud metallic noise interrupted their conversation. Kara and Zraxar both jumped to their feet, weapons drawn, their attention focused on the source of the sound. It came from deeper inside the shelter, like something was moving. "Stay behind me," Zraxar ordered, his voice low. Kara nodded, but she didn't like the idea of hiding behind him. She didn't trust Zraxar completely, but she had no choice right now. They had to face whatever was in the shelter. The two of them moved cautiously through the dark corridors, the air growing colder the further they went. The metallic sound continued, echoing off the walls. It sounded like something was being dragged. Kara's hand tightened around her blaster as they approached the source of the noise. Finally, they reached a large room at the center of the shelter. The door to the room slid open, revealing a massive dark chamber. In the center of the room was a strange device, a metal sphere pulsating with an eerie light. It hummed, as if alive, and the metallic sound was coming from it. Kara stepped forward cautiously, her eyes narrowing. "What is this thing?" Droxar didn't move. He just stood there, his expression unreadable. This is why the Exocarn never explored the planet fully. The shelter. It's not just a shelter. It's a containment facility. Kara felt a cold rush of fear. Containment? For what? Droxar hesitated before answering. For something ancient. Something that was meant to stay buried. The silence in the room seemed to stretch, and Kara felt her heart rate increase. What kind of creature or entity could be so dangerous that the Exocarn would build a shelter to contain it? And why hadn't they told her this? Kara didn't have time to process her thoughts. Suddenly, the hum of the sphere grew louder, and the room around them seemed to tremble. A flicker of light shot from the sphere, and Kara stepped back in alarm. The air grew thick, charged with an unnatural energy. Droxar stepped forward, his expression still calm. "It's awakening. We need to leave now." "What is awakening?" Kara demanded. But before Droxar could answer, the sphere's light flared again, and the ground beneath their feet shook violently. Kara stumbled but caught herself, her pulse racing. She had no idea what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure. The planet wasn't just dangerous because of the creatures outside. The real danger was hidden inside this shelter, and it was waking up. The sphere's light grew brighter, and a deep, low rumble echoed through the room. Kara's eyes widened as she saw something moving inside the sphere. A shadow, something large, something alive. Droxar reached for her arm. "We have to run. Now." But it was too late. The creature inside the sphere was already breaking free. The ground shook beneath Kara's feet as the strange sphere emitted a blinding light. For a moment, she could do nothing but stare, transfixed by the glowing energy. The air around her grew thick, heavy with the unnatural charge of something ancient and powerful. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her mind screamed at her to run. Droxar was already moving, his alien reflexes faster than hers. He grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the sphere. "We need to leave. Now," he commanded, his voice urgent. Kara didn't need any more convincing. The sound of the rumbling intensified, and the room seemed to warp with the energy now flooding from the sphere. She stumbled after Droxar, her breath coming in short gasps as they raced down the dark corridors of the shelter. Behind them, the sphere's light flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Kara could hear something. Movement, scraping against metal. It wasn't just the light that was growing brighter. Something was breaking free, something far worse than the Slexer. Droxar led them back toward the entrance, but the whole shelter was shaking, groaning under the pressure of whatever force had been released. The walls hummed, vibrating with the pulse of the sphere. Kara's mind raced, her thoughts scattered. "What is that thing?" she asked, voice tight with fear. Droxar didn't look back, his face set in concentration. A creature not native to this planet. It was contained here by the Exocarn. Kara's eyes widened. "Contained? You're saying your people imprisoned this thing?" "It's not just any creature," Droxar said, his voice grim. "It's an ancient entity, a being of immense power." Kara's mind reeled at the implications. She had thought they were stranded because of a simple crash. Miscalculations, maybe, or an uncharted planet. But no, this was far worse. The planet itself was a prison for something powerful and dangerous. And now it was free. They reached the shelter's entrance, only to find the door jammed, the metal warped from the energy surge. Droxar kicked at it, but it didn't budge. Kara's pulse quickened as she heard the sounds of something massive moving behind them, growing louder. She could almost feel the floor beneath her vibrate with each step the entity took. "We're trapped," she said, panic creeping into her voice. Zroxar didn't respond at first. He stepped back from the door, his mind working rapidly. Kara could hear the roar of the creature now, a deep, guttural sound that made her stomach turn. It was coming closer, and there was nowhere to hide. Then, with a sudden motion, Zroxar pulled something from his side. An intricate device, small but powerful. He held it up to the door, activating a sequence of buttons. There was a whirring noise, followed by a series of sharp clicks. The door groaned again, but this time it moved. Slowly, the metal shifted, and the gap widened just enough for them to slip through. Zroxar was the first to move, stepping outside into the jungle's darkened expanse. Kara followed close behind, her breath shallow and fast. As soon as they were outside, Kara heard it. The creature's roar echoed through the jungle, shaking the air itself. They didn't have much time. Kara glanced at Zroxar, who was already scanning the area. His face was unreadable, but Kara could see the determination in his posture. Whatever this entity was, Zroxar had faced it before. The Exocarn had clearly known what they were up against. "What now?" Kara asked, keeping her voice low. "We need to move fast," Zroxar replied, "and stay hidden. If it catches our scent, we won't last long." Kara nodded, her heart still racing. They had no idea how far the creature could track them, or how fast it was. But one thing was clear. This was no ordinary predator. It was something else entirely. They moved swiftly through the thick trees, the jungle swallowing them whole. Every branch, every rustling leaf seemed to add to the tension in Kara's chest. She knew that Zroxar was right. They couldn't afford to be caught. The creature was relentless, and if it was anything like the Slexer, it wouldn't stop until it had its prey. As they made their way deeper into the jungle, Kara's mind raced. They couldn't just run forever. They had to figure out a way to stop it, to contain it again, or they were both dead. Zroxar stopped suddenly, raising a hand to signal Kara to be quiet. They crouched low, listening. The jungle around them was eerily still. The creature's roar had faded, but that didn't mean they were safe. "What is it?" Kara whispered, her eyes scanning the darkness. Zroxar's sharp eyes were fixed on something ahead. "It's close. Too close." Kara strained her ears, trying to pick out any sound that might give the creature's location away. The silence was deafening. Then, without warning, something moved. Fast, too fast. Zroxar threw himself to the side, and Kara followed instinctively. A massive shape crashed through the trees, knocking branches aside. The creature was enormous. Its body was shadowed in the dark, but the outline was unmistakable. It was a monstrosity, its long, segmented limbs reaching out like claws, and its multiple glowing eyes scanning the jungle for them. It had found them. Kara's heart raced as the massive creature closed in on them, its glowing eyes cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Every instinct told her to run, but Zroxar was already moving, his movements quick and precise. The alien creature's roars echoed through the jungle, sending vibrations through the ground beneath them. There was no escape, not unless they acted fast. Zroxar darted behind a large tree, motioning for Kara to follow. She didn't hesitate. They had no time to waste. The creature was fast, but Zroxar's instincts were sharper. He crouched low, blending into the shadows of the thick underbrush. "We can't outrun it," Kara whispered, her breath coming in quick gasps. "What do we do now?" Zroxar didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the jungle around them. The trees were dense, and the undergrowth was thick with vines and strange, alien plants. Kara's pulse raced, and her mind spun as she tried to think of a plan. If they couldn't outrun the creature, they'd have to outsmart it. "The creature is drawn to movement," Zroxar finally said, his voice calm despite the situation. "We need to stay still and wait for it to pass. It won't sense us if we don't move." Kara nodded, trying to steady her breath. She knew Zraxar was right. Panic was their worst enemy. The best chance they had was to remain hidden. The sound of heavy footsteps grew louder. The creature was getting closer. Kara could hear the scraping of its claws on the ground, the snapping of branches as it moved. Her heart seemed to beat in time with its movements. Minutes felt like hours as they remained motionless, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She stole a glance at Zraxar, whose face remained stoic. He was waiting for the right moment, calculating the creature's movements. Then suddenly, the creature's massive form loomed just beyond them. Kara could feel the heat of its presence, the air around them thick with its unnatural energy. It was so close that she could almost reach out and touch it. Her muscles tensed, ready to spring into action at the slightest movement. Zraxar's eyes flicked to her, signaling her to remain still. Kara swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. The creature was sniffing the air now, its many eyes scanning the trees, searching for any sign of movement. Kara held her breath, praying it wouldn't find them. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Every second felt like a lifetime. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, the creature moved on. It let out a low, growling sound, and the earth-shaking footsteps began to fade as it retreated deeper into the jungle. Kara exhaled in relief, her body trembling from the tension. She had never been so terrified in her life. Her heart was still racing, but they were safe, at least for now. Zraxar didn't move immediately. He waited, watching for any signs that the creature might turn back. Only when he was sure it was gone did he stand up, slowly and cautiously. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice low. "It won't stop until it finds us." Kara nodded, pushing herself to her feet. She was exhausted, her body aching from the stress and fear of the chase, but she knew they had no choice. The creature was relentless, and if they didn't find a way to stop it, they were as good as dead. Zraxar led the way, his movements silent as he guided them through the dense jungle. Kara followed close behind, her eyes scanning their surroundings for any signs of danger. The jungle seemed to stretch on forever, each step taking them deeper into the unknown. They didn't speak much. There was no time for words. Every sound, every rustle of leaves, felt like a threat now. The weight of the creature's pursuit was constant, hanging over them like a dark cloud. After what felt like hours, they reached a small clearing. Zraxar stopped, his sharp eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. Kara instinctively followed his lead, staying close and keeping her breath steady. "This is as far as we go for now," Zraxar said, his voice still calm. "We'll set a trap." Kara frowned. "A trap? You think we can stop it?" Zraxar nodded. "It's the only way." He quickly set to work, his hands moving with practiced precision. Kara watched as he gathered materials from the jungle, branches, vines, and a strange, glowing substance from the plants around them. He worked quickly, setting up a series of traps designed to disorient the creature and slow it down. Kara didn't question him. She knew they didn't have time to waste. If they couldn't stop the creature here, they'd have no chance of escaping. The jungle around them seemed to grow darker, the shadows lengthening as the night deepened. Kara's eyes kept darting to the trees, half expecting the creature to burst through at any moment. But there was no sign of it. Zraxar finished setting the final trap, his sharp eyes watching the path ahead. "Now we wait." Kara took a deep breath, her body tense with anticipation. The trap was ready, but they both knew it was a long shot. If the creature wasn't fooled, they were as good as dead. As they crouched down in the shadows, Kara couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could keep running. They were in the heart of the jungle now, with no way out. The creature was relentless, and she knew they couldn't survive another encounter like the last. But maybe, just maybe, this trap would be their last chance. The jungle was alive with movement, but the quiet was even more unnerving. Kara crouched low behind a thick bush, her fingers trembling as she clutched her blaster. Zraxar stood a few paces ahead, his eyes never leaving the path where they'd set their trap. The air was thick, still with anticipation, and the weight of the moment pressed down on them both. Kara's mind raced. Could they really stop this creature? It was massive, unstoppable, and it had already proven its ability to track them relentlessly. The trap they'd set was their only hope. "I still don't understand," Kara whispered, breaking the silence. "How do you know this will work?" Xroxar glanced back at her, his expression calm, almost detached. "I don't, but it's our best chance." Kara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had to trust him. He was their only hope, even if she didn't completely understand everything about the Exocarn species or their history with this planet. She had learned more in these past few days than she had ever expected, but the creature they were up against was unlike anything she'd ever seen. It wasn't just an animal. It was something older, more powerful, a creature that had been sealed away for a reason. And now it was free. They didn't speak again. The stillness of the jungle around them seemed to stretch on forever, but Kara's ears were tuned to every sound, every subtle shift in the air. There was something coming. She could feel it in her bones. Then, out of the silence, a low growl echoed through the trees. Kara froze, her breath caught in her throat. Xroxar's eyes narrowed. He moved silently, positioning himself closer to the trap. Kara's heart pounded in her chest as she followed his lead, moving with care, step by step, her every movement calculated. They had to be careful. One mistake could mean their end. The growl grew louder, closer. The jungle seemed to shift as the creature's massive body moved through it, its eyes glowing in the distance. Kara gripped her blaster tightly, her finger ready on the trigger. Xroxar raised his hand, signaling for her to hold her position. She barely breathed, waiting for the right moment. Suddenly, the creature broke into the clearing, its hulking form stepping into the path. Kara's blood ran cold. It was even bigger than she had imagined. Its segmented limbs moved with an unnatural grace, its multiple glowing eyes searching the area with a terrifying precision. The creature's roar split the air, a sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. The trap was set. The moment had arrived. Xroxar acted first, activating the hidden mechanism from behind the trees. The trap sprang to life. Vines shot up from the ground, wrapping around the creature's legs, pulling it down. The creature howled in fury as it tried to free itself, but it was momentarily held. Kara's heart raced. They had one shot. "Now," Xroxar shouted. Without hesitation, Kara raised her blaster and fired. The blast struck the creature's exposed side, but it didn't stop. The creature's hide was tough, resistant to the shots. But that was just the first step. Kara didn't pause. She fired again, aiming for the joints, the weak points Xroxar had identified earlier. The creature screeched in pain as more blasts hit, but it was still fighting to break free. The trap was holding it for now, but the vines wouldn't last forever. "Get closer," Xroxar ordered, his voice urgent. Kara ran, moving swiftly and silently through the underbrush. Xroxar was already ahead, and together they closed the distance to the creature, which was now struggling more violently. It thrashed, its limbs twisting and snapping against the entangled vines. They had to act quickly. Kara's mind worked fast, and she fired another shot, aiming for a thick vein-like spot on the creature's neck. The shot hit, and the creature froze for a split second. That was enough. Xroxar stepped forward, his own weapon aimed at the creature's heart. He didn't hesitate. He fired. A bright flash of energy pierced the creature's chest, and it gave one final, pained screech before collapsing to the ground. For a moment, everything was still. Kara stood frozen, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She watched as the creature's massive body lay still, the glow in its eyes fading. It was over. They had done it. But even as the jungle grew quiet again, Kara knew this was just the beginning. They had won this battle, but there was still so much they didn't understand. They still had to get off this planet, figure out why the Exocarn had abandoned it, and deal with whatever else was lurking in the darkness. Xroxar turned to Kara, his expression unreadable as always. But there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that might have been respect. "We're not safe yet," Zroxer said, his voice steady. But this was a step. Kara nodded. They weren't safe yet, but they had survived. Together. And that was something. They stood there in the clearing, the jungle around them still. The stars above were dimmed by the cloud cover, but the fight had gone out of the creature. For now, they could rest. But the journey was far from over. As they turned to move forward, the jungle seemed a little less threatening, but Kara couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was still waiting, something that neither of them fully understood. But for now, they had survived. And that, Kara thought, was enough. For now. Kara and Zroxer trudged through the dense alien forest, their footsteps crunching against the unfamiliar, spongy ground. The air was thick with a strange humidity, and the sky above them had a strange, almost sickly green hue. They didn't speak much. The crash and their situation weighed heavily on them both. Kara couldn't shake the unease crawling up her spine. The planet, although quiet, felt wrong. There was something about it, something off. And Zroxer's silence only added to the feeling. The Exocarn wasn't known for small talk, but today, his usual stoic calm seemed like a wall between them. She wanted to ask him what he thought of their situation, but she wasn't sure how much she could trust him. "I don't trust him," she thought, glancing at Zroxer from the corner of her eye. "But for now, he's the only ally I have." Hours had passed since they set out, and the shelter Zroxer had mentioned was still not in sight. The jungle was dense, full of thick vines and towering trees that seemed to reach for the sky. Even the sounds of wildlife were muted, like the planet itself was holding its breath. "I thought you said the shelter was close," Kara said, trying to keep the irritation from creeping into her voice. She had always been a go-getter, someone who acted before thinking, and the slow, calculated pace of the Exocarn was starting to drive her mad. Zroxer didn't look at her as he spoke, his gaze always on the path ahead. "It's close. Patience is necessary for survival." His voice was cold, distant. Kara couldn't hold back a scoff. "You and your patience. Do you think we have time to sit around and wait? We need to get moving." Zroxer stopped, turning to face her, his sharp features set in an unreadable expression. "You humans move too quickly. If we rush into danger, we risk everything. The shelter is there, but we must approach carefully." Kara clenched her fists, frustrated by the lack of urgency. "I don't have time to be careful. I need to get to that shelter. Now." "Then you will get yourself killed," Zroxer said flatly, before continuing his trek forward. Kara wanted to argue, but something in his words made her pause. She was no fool. She had survived in difficult situations before, but this planet felt different. Still, the nagging feeling in her gut told her that time was running out. She quickened her pace to match Zroxer's, still unsure whether she was making the right choice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they arrived at the shelter. It was hidden deep within the trees, barely noticeable among the thick foliage. The structure was a mix of metal and stone, blending into the environment in a way that suggested it had been there for centuries. Despite its ancient appearance, there was something unsettling about it. Its windows were dark, and the air around it felt colder than the rest of the jungle. "This is it," Zroxer said, his voice soft, almost reverent. Kara studied the structure carefully. "It doesn't look safe." Zroxer nodded but didn't reply. Instead, he moved toward the entrance, his movements calculated and precise. Kara hesitated for a moment before following him. The door to the shelter slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a dark, empty space. The air inside was stale, but there was no immediate threat. "After you," Kara said sarcastically, stepping inside. Zroxer ignored her tone and followed, his alien eyes scanning the interior. Kara looked around, taking in the surroundings. The shelter was strange, far more advanced than anything she had seen in human colonies, yet ancient in its design. There were no signs of recent activity, but the faint hum of energy running through the walls suggested that the shelter had power. The two ambassadors began to explore, each wary of the other, but also aware of the necessity of working together. Kara made her way over to a control panel embedded in the wall. It was old, covered in dust, but it still looked functional. "I can try to access the ship's emergency systems from here," Kara said, her fingers hovering over the interface. "It might give us a way to send a distress signal or get our bearings." Zragzur's eyes narrowed. "Don't waste time on that. We need to focus on survival." Kara shot him an annoyed look. "Survival? We can't survive if we don't get help. We need to get back to Federation space. We need—" A loud crack echoed through the shelter, cutting her off. Both of them froze. It came from outside. They moved quickly, instinctively, toward the source of the sound. Kara's heart raced, her hand moving to the blaster at her side. What was that? Zragzur was already at the entrance, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the surroundings. He didn't speak at first, then turned to her. "Something is coming. Stay close." Kara followed him, her hand still on her weapon. Whatever had made that sound, she knew it wasn't friendly. And just like that, everything had changed. The shelter, the uneasy truce between her and Zragzur, their mission, it all felt like it was falling apart. Survival wasn't just about staying alive anymore. It was about facing the unknown, together.